Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Dixon, and I am the Director of Data Analytics and Strategy with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, or MORPC. I'm excited to welcome you to our third webinar in the series, Responding to the Housing Crisis, Identifying Challenges and Seeking Solutions. The series is co-sponsored by CURA and MORPC. Throughout the series, we're hearing from experts on key factors and considerations for the housing crisis and beyond. Today's guest, Charles Marone, will take us through a history of housing policy in the U.S. and how we can begin to restore balance to the housing market. Before we introduce Charles, I want to mention a few logistical items. If you require closed captioning, you will find a box at the bottom of the screen labeled CC. Click on the box, select Show Subtitles. This will allow you to view subtitles during the presentation. During our webinar, feel free to submit questions using the Q&A box. We will ask as many of our questions as we can during the last portion of the presentation, but go ahead and submit them at any time. I'll be watching that. The chat has been disabled, so again, please use the Q&A. That will get your information to the meeting organizers. This event is approved for 1.5 AICP credits. To claim your CM credits, log in to My APA account on the APA website and enter the event into your online CM event log. There will be a brief survey at the end of the webinar. If you have time, we encourage you to provide your feedback to improve these events. If you have any additional questions following the event, you can email CURA's Outreach Coordinator, Jordan, at swaim-fox.1@osu.edu, and I'll read that out to you. That is SWAIM-fox.1@osu.edu. You can learn more about MORPC's work and our upcoming events at morpc.org. To find out more about CURA's future events or sign up for their monthly newsletter, visit cura.osu.edu. That's cura.osu.edu. Or like CURA on Facebook, follow them on Instagram and X. With that, I will now pass it over to CURA's director, Harvey Miller, to introduce our speaker for today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. And I am Harvey Miller. I'm a professor of geography at The Ohio State University and director of the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis. I want to thank MORPC for their partnership in this webinar series. And, besides Dave, I also want to give a shout out to a couple other people who contributed to this programming, Adam Poor and Jonathan Miller at MORPC, and our own Jordan Swaim-Fox here at CURA. Our guest today, Charles Marone, known as Chuck to his friends and colleagues. He's the founder and president of Strong Towns. He's a civil engineer and a land use planner with decades of experience. He holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's of urban regional planning, both from the University of Minnesota. Chuck is the author of Strong Towns, a bottom-up revolution to rebuild American prosperity, Wiley, 2019, and Confessions of Recovering Engineer, Transportation for a Strong Town, also Wiley in 2021. He hosts the Strong Towns podcast and is a primary writer for the Strong Towns web content. He has presented Strong Towns concepts in hundreds of cities and towns across North America, and Planetism named him as one of the 10 most influential urbanists of all time. Very impressive. Chuck, welcome back to Columbus. This is your second webinar with us. Your first was in March 2021. You spoke about your first book, Strong Towns, A Bottom-Up Revolution to Rebuild American Prosperity. You were also kind enough, I recall, to record a follow-up podcast where you addressed the questions we didn't get to in the main webinar. And just for our viewers, both of these very worthwhile recordings are posted at our website at cura.osu.edu. Go to Outreach, Past Events 2021, and you can see Chuck's previous webinar with us at CURA. I do want to make a program note before I hand it off to you, Chuck. Today's webinar is going to go for 90 minutes until 1:30. We're going to have extra time for discussion and for questions. And again, we encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll hope we'll get to all of them. With that, Chuck, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Harvey. Nice to see you again, my friend. Thank you for the invitation back, and thank you for giving me the floor. It's an exciting week at Strong Towns because it's our member week. We do this twice a year. We celebrate all the people who have stepped up and been a part of our movement. So if that is one of you on this program today, especially thank you for everything you do to help build Strong Towns. This is exciting. I've been out on the road for quite a while. Last spring, I did a book tour, and then this fall, I've been on a book tour. We're done now, so I'm gonna enjoy some time not traveling, but it's fun to be able to go through this. And I gotta say, this presentation, the interaction, the conversation that's grown up around it is really exciting. So I'm happy to be here and share it with all of you. Do we have a housing crisis? When we ask people this question, we get kind of a uniform response. Yes, of course, absolutely, we have a housing crisis. When we ask a follow-up question, what needs to happen to address this crisis to housing prices? This is where there's a divergence that might surprise some of you. About half people say prices need to go up. To address the crisis that we're in, prices need to go up. Another half says to address the crisis we're in, prices need to go down. If you are solidly in one of these camps, you might be, surprised, shocked. Who are these people who think the opposite of me? I think it's important for us at the top here to step back and recognize that there's two conversations going on about housing today. They're mutually exclusive. There's not a lot of overlap, very little overlap, if any, here. One of these conversations is about housing as shelter, right? The base need in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Food and shelter. This is what we all need. Everybody has to have it. The other conversation going on around housing is about housing as a financial product, as the core foundational piece of our financial system, the number one reserve of banks, the idea that pension funds and other investment instruments are all, in a sense, backstopped by the American mortgage and all its bundles and derivatives. These conversations are very, very different. They're happening in different places. They're sensitive to different things, and they have very different priorities. In one of these conversations, housing prices must fall. If we are going to get people in houses and have that housing be affordable, housing prices need to come down dramatically. In the other conversation, housing prices cannot be allowed to fall. In fact, if housing prices slow, even for a brief period of time, if the housing price appreciation starts to reverse, and that reversal looks like it might go, this system is not going to work. These two conversations, these two objectives are in contrast to each other, and they've created what we refer to as the housing trap. This trap that we have set, where housing is unaffordable for a broad number of people, but housing cannot be allowed to become, in a sense, cheaper or affordable, because that will mess up the financial system. This is the trap we are in. And what we're going to talk about today is how we got here and how we get out of it. And let me preview this. Getting out of it is going to mean doing things differently than we do today. It's going to mean a bottom-up approach. And it's going to mean local officials and local people opting out of the current system and doing something different, which all of us have the capacity to do. I want to go back to the way we financed housing before the Great Depression. And it's fascinating to me because I've been on the road talking about this, and this is the part that people go, wow, I never understood this. If we look back at the way that banking was done prior to the Great Depression, I think we all intuitively understand that it was a hyper-local undertaking, right? You would have used local banks. You put your money in there. It was not FDIC insured. The local bank itself then was a collection of people's deposits that were then lent out to people. This is a hyper-conservative or very, very risk-averse kind of undertaking. Right? They're literally messing with all of your savings. So they were going to be extremely, extremely risk averse. This meant that if you were going to get a mortgage, it was going to be very different than the kind of mortgage you would get today. First of all, it was going to require a 50% down payment. You were going to have a lot of skin in the game. Understand, if you're taking every one of your community's savings and lending it out to someone, they want to make sure that you're not going to default. And if you're going to default, they've got a lot of mechanism to get their money back. The mortgage you were going to get was going to be an interest-only loan, and it was going to be a short-term loan, a 3-year, 4-year, 5-year interest-only loan with a balloon payment at the end. At the end of that period, you would either be expected to pay that loan off or roll it over into some other new type of instrument. This all changed during the Great Depression, and it changed for some kind of fundamental reasons. In a sense, the Great Depression was this massive dislocating event, right? 25+% unemployment, people having, losing their homes, losing their jobs for no fault of their own, a very disorienting period of time. I want to talk about what this did to the local mortgage market because the impact was dramatic. If you owned a home during the Great Depression, that price dropped, right? The value of your home actually went down. There were fewer people able to buy a home. Just in a general market sense, the value of homes went down. What that meant is that when you got to the end of that 3-year, 4-year, 5-year loan and you needed to roll it over, what the bank was going to lend you was going to be different than what they had lent you last time. It was going to be less. It was going to be 50% of your home value. The problem is that now there's a gap between what you owe and what the bank is going to lend you. And in order for you to refinance that loan, you're going to have to come up with cash. During the Great Depression, a lot of people could not do this for very obvious and logical reasons. And when you couldn't do this, there was no dispensation. There was no, okay, well, we'll, figure this out. Literally, they were messing with the savings of everybody in the community. They wanted to make sure that that did not go bad. Otherwise, you would have a big bank run and the bank would go insolvent. And so what would happen is you would get foreclosed on. What does a bank do when they foreclose on a home? They don't hang on to it, they sell it, right? What happens when you sell a home into a depressed market? It lowers prices even further. What happens when you lower prices even further and the next person comes in with a refinancing? Well, they have to come up with even more cash. And on and on and on. Economists call this a deflationary spiral, right? The more people that get caught into it, the more it accelerates. The more it accelerates, the more people get caught up in it. This was the problem at the very beginning of the Roosevelt administration. This was the crisis in housing. During the early days of the New Deal, one of the most urgent things that the FDR administration did was to try to stop this downward spiral, right? One of the first things they did is they went to local banks and they said, hey, don't foreclose on people. Stop doing that. If you've got a loan that is in default, here's what we would like you to do. We'd like you to sell it to us. We, the federal government, will buy it. And when the federal government would buy that loan, they would turn around to the homeowner and they would say, hey, how would you like to stay in your house? What we will do is we will refinance that loan for you, the federal government. We will do it over a 8-year, 10-year, 12-year period of time. Instead of paying interest only, we'll add some principal to it, and we'll allow you to stay in your home. This stabilized banks, it stabilized the housing market, it slowed and stopped that deflationary spiral. The federal government also stepped into local banks and said, hey, we need you making a lot more home loans. The way we're going to fix this market, stabilize this market, is to keep people in their homes and make this easier to do. So how about you have less down payment than you are normally requiring? And recognizing that that is creating more risk for you as a local bank, what we would like to do is we would like to insure that. We would like to actually give you insurance for against loss, because we want you to do, let's say 40% down payment, let's say 30%, maybe 20% down payment. That difference, that gap represents higher risk for you, the local bank. We will insure that, insure you against loss. The federal government ultimately created longer and longer instruments by creating an organization called Fannie Mae. The idea behind Fannie Mae was we want banks to do something that they do not like to do, which is write long-term loans. Banks need to be able to readjust their loans. If interest rates rise and they're left with a low-yielding loan, be able to get rid of that, be able to sell it off, be able to, in a sense, divest from that. the federal government, through Fannie Mae, gave them a vehicle to do that. If you wrote a conforming loan, a loan that met certain requirements, and you wanted to increase your cash reserves, unload some of those off the books, make more loans, you could sell those loans off to Fannie Mae on the secondary market and create this liquidity in your own bank and make more loans. This was all designed to stop this downward spiral of prices. And let me make a point here. I make this point in the book. I think it's worth stating here. In many ways, I think you could argue that this was a very moral thing to do, right? A lot of people, through no fault of their own, were getting kicked out of their homes. The housing market was collapsing. This was having a massive negative impact on people. And by the federal government stepping in and stopping that downward spiral, we allowed a lot of people who otherwise would have experienced massive distress to stay in their homes, to have the dignity of hanging on to their place, to not lose their savings, their investments, their stuff that they have put into this house. A very moral thing to do. At the end of the war, World War II, well, let me back up 1 second. The thing that got us out of the Great Depression is World War II. Recognize that we all think that in our brains because we live in a world where our culture is dominated by the insights of economists. What an insane view of the world. Hey, everything is really bad. We're in a Great Depression. Things are really tough. Ooh, happy times are here again. Global war, right? I mean, that makes no sense at all. Yet if you are a bean counter in Washington, D.C., and you just, care nothing about human suffering, just about what's GDP doing, what's unemployment doing, the war was fantastic. We took millions of people, we shipped them overseas to kill and to die. We took millions of other people and we put them into factories and industries making the implements of war. They made ships and planes and munitions and all this stuff. If you are a bean counter, if you just care about the numbers, World War II was incredible. If you are blind to human suffering, this was great because it got people working again. The problem was, as the war was coming to an end, the economists started to freak out. This is a excerpt of a memo that Paul Samuelson, probably the premier American economist of the last century, wrote to FDR. He said, if the war ends, there's going to be ushered in the greatest period of unemployment and industrial dislocation any economy has ever faced. In other words, when this war ends, if we bring home all these troops and we shut down all these businesses, we're just going to go right back into the Great Depression. There's nothing different about the 1940s than there is about the 1930s. That's the same thing. Is that what happened? Of course not. We all, understand that what happened was we started to build this new version of America. The troops came home and we started to energize our cities into growth machines. Obviously, there's a highway component to this. There's an infrastructure component to this. I talk about this in other books. But if we look at housing, the magical thing we did with housing is we took all of these tools that we had created in the Great Depression to stop housing prices from going down, and we reworked them to try to make housing expand, to try to make the housing market, in a sense, go up, to try to juice the housing market. You like 15-year mortgages? How about 20-year mortgages? How about 30-year mortgages? You like 8% interest rates? How about 6%? How about 5%? How about 4%? How about 3% interest rates? Down payments of 50%? Let's go to 40. How about 30% down payment? How about 20% down payment? How about 10? How about 5? How about no down payment at all? In each one of these steps, what we did is we, on one hand, made housing more attainable. We allowed more people to spread their payments out to, in a sense, pay more, borrow more for the same housing, while simultaneously juicing the market and allowing the housing market to grow, providing lots and lots of particularly single-family homes for people in the 1950s and the 1960s. Let's acknowledge that this was wildly successful as an economic program in the couple of decades after World War II. I start this chart here in 1945. It goes up to what we talk about as the first life cycle of this suburban expansion, the first life cycle of this new suburban experiment. If we look at things like gross domestic product, what we see is that this is one of the most robust times in American history. GDP grew rapidly. This is all the kind of things we have in our brains that's synonymous. Again, we live in a world dominated by economists. Economists took a lot of lessons, in my opinion, cherry-picked lessons from this period of time. But the idea is that look at what we can do when we grow the economy. We had very little growth in public debt during this period of time. And so this is kind of the magical thing for economists. We grew our way out of the debt we had at the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, our debt to GDP ratio was at unprecedented levels. We were able to reduce dramatically that debt to GDP ratio just by growing our economy. The more we could grow, the easier that debt became to service, the easier that debt became to handle. All right, this is the story that economists love to tell. And it's one of, just grow. The more we grow, the better off we are. What is not often included in this, but I think is an important component, it becomes more important over time, is the private debt. What we see is dramatic levels of private debt during this period of time. This is the Case-Shiller Index. The Case-Shiller Index points at home prices over time. Again, I start the chart here in 1945 at the end of World War II. The Case-Shiller Index actually goes back to the late 1800s. I've expanded it out here to the end of the subprime crisis. If you look at the first couple of decades after the end of World War II, you see this period of volatility, and then you see this long decline that takes place. What you're watching there, what you're seeing there is that kind of efficiency of markets that tends to lower prices over time. Think of the idea that your big screen TV is cheaper now than it would have been 15 years ago, right? Why is that? It's because we figured out supply chains, we figured out how to manufacture things more efficiently. We figured out those things, and those result in lower prices. That's what you're seeing in the first couple of decades after World War II. We start this suburban expansion. We start to reinvent and reimagine what our cities should look like. We figure out how to finance, how to insure, how to build all this stuff. The supply chains work themselves out. And you see housing prices becoming lower and lower and lower slightly over time as these efficiencies start to take hold. This is what a natural market looks like. And it's what a lot of people think the housing market is today. But the thing is that these things were built for one purpose. The idea here was not to create housing. The idea, the core idea, was to juice the economy, to make sure we didn't slide back into a Great Depression. Housing was just the vehicle to do that, right? Suburban expansion was the vehicle to do that. So what we have starting in the late 1960s is a period of overheating. I'm going to call this the first inflation bubble. The idea that we would pour so much money into growth, we just keep growing, and the economy starts to overheat. We get a period of inflation, prices broadly go up, home prices go up, and we react to that in the ways that we are familiar with. I want to point out something about inflation with local banks. At this point, we have asked local banks to do something that they do not like to do, which is lend long. Local banks borrow short and now are being asked to lend long. And let me be very clear about what that is. When you deposit money, you are lending money to the bank. The bank is borrowing money from you. They are borrowing from you very short term. You can literally deposit your money in the bank, go back through the drive-through and take your money out. That is the shortest of short-term loans, right? The bank, and this is going to be really interesting for those of you that are younger and don't know this, there's this idea called interest that the banks pay. Years ago, the banks used to pay interest if you put money on deposit. It's kind of cute and quaint. That was actually the banking model for many, many years. So there's this joke within the banking industry. They run on the 3-6-3 model. They lend at 3%. They borrow at 3%. They lend at 6%. And then you get out on the golf course by 3 p.m. It's a very boring, very simple business model. That's what you see in those first couple of decades after World War II. Let's take those numbers, 3-6. The bank would pay you 3% on your deposit. The bank would then lend out a mortgage at 6%. And the difference in that would be their profit. The problem is when you get in an inflationary cycle, if inflation goes from 1%, 2% to say 8%, 9%, people depositing money in the bank are going to demand higher rates of interest. Their money's losing value every year. There are other things they can do with it that would retain their value. In order for them to invest in your bank, to save their money there, to put their money there, they're going to require a higher rate of return than inflation. And so instead of paying 3% interest, you're going to pay 9%, 10%, or higher. The problem is you've lent out at 6% over a long period of time. And so now you are faced with one of two choices as a bank. You can either continue to pay depositors a low amount, let's say 3%, and what will happen is that all your depositors will leave and go to a different bank that will pay higher rates of interest, and your bank will fail. Or you could pay interest that is competitive, say 10%, and now you are paying out 10%, but you are bringing in 6%, and your bank slowly bleeds cash. Your bank slowly dies. Neither of these are good options for a bank. And so what we had was, in a sense, the first post-war bank bailout. We created in this period of time Freddie Mac. We created Ginnie Mae. These were instruments to buy these, in a sense, now bad mortgages from local banks to, in a sense, go in and bail out these local banks and give them liquidity so they could write new loans at higher interest rates that would work for them. We had a similar thing happen in the 1970s where inflation went even higher. During that period of time, you saw a lot of local banks struggling, a lot of S&Ls failing or having underwater balance sheets. You had the same kind of bailout effect. We decided in this period of time that we were going to deregulate the industry. Again, put on your economist hat. Let's go back to that post-war expansion. If we could just grow our way out of it, in the early 1980s, we've got lots of financial problems, particularly in banks. What we need to do is grow our way out of that mess. What ends up being the S&L bubble, a bubble created mostly by fraud, by looking, in a sense, turning the other way because we really needed the growth badly. And then you wind up with the deregulation bubble is the S&L bubble, the decentralization bubble of the S&L crisis. The idea that if we just take and flattened out the system, tried to get more money into places where people were having a tough time borrowing, make it easier for people to borrow, that we could get housing prices back and get the market growing again. I want to point out something about each of these. This has that kind of familiar overcorrection. You can see in each of these instances, the bubble gets greater and greater and greater. You are looking at a system that goes from, in a sense, post-war, where you're building inefficiencies, to increasingly financialized. By the end of this, what we start to see in the 2000 to 2008 subprime crisis is that housing is now starting to act more like a stock, more like a security. It is actually in price responding more to macroeconomic conditions than it is local supply, demand, efficiency type things. At this point, what we see is that, yes, these are shelter, but primarily in our system today, these are financial products. Yes, the single family home serves as a home for someone to live in. Yes, a 5/1 building serves as housing for people to live in. But primarily, these are being built in this way because they are fantastic financial products. The single family home market on the secondary market is massive. We can buy up mortgages from all over the country. We sell them off to bundlers. The bundlers will take them, bundle them with similar products, cut them up into securities, sell the tranches of those securities in different ways, hypothecate them, bet on them, combine them, remix them, and create all kinds of derivative financial products for them. Those financial products are the basis of bank reserves, of pension funds, of investment funds, of all different kinds of places. We have actually passed federal legislation saying if you have a mortgage-backed security that is AA or higher, that can be counted as your reserve fund with the same level of security as US Treasury notes. And so there's, in a sense, an insatiable demand for this type of financial product. The same thing with the 5/1s. If you travel around the country, you see similar type of buildings popping up all over the place, sometimes seemingly random. The reason why this product is so ubiquitous is not because there's a huge demand for it. There's a huge demand for housing, no doubt. But this particular product is a really great financial product. We can build these at very different price points in different markets, yet they have similar characteristics. That is the perfect kind of thing to, again, bundle, securitize, and sell off. These are, in a sense, standardized products that we can financialize and allow lots and lots of money to pour into them. If you want to build something that is different than these products, that is custom, that is different, there's not the liquidity. There's tons and tons of capital pouring into these two products. We are used to thinking about a home being a product and the family buying the home being the consumer. The consumer buys the product. I think we have to start looking at this in the way it really is today and ask the question, who is the product? The consumer here is the person buying the payments. The product is a promise to pay 30 years of your income on a mortgage. That is the thing that's being traded. That is the thing that has the most value. And that is the thing that is setting the price today in our marketplace. That is the dominant thing contributing to the prices. So where are we today? I put housing recovery on here because that is the way that economists, again, talk about it. If you listen to economists, they will say 2000 to 2008, that was the housing bubble. That was the subprime bubble. That was the crisis. That was a distortion of the market. Those same economists then will go on to talk about the period of time afterwards up to today as a housing recovery. I'm trying to have you listen closely to economists and understand the dissonance in their language. How do you recover to a bubble condition? How do you acknowledge something is a massive distortion and then say we are going to have policies engineered around recovering to that distortion? This is what we have done and beyond that. Here's what I want you to take away from the stuff I've shared so far. The idea of making it easier for more people to borrow more money to pay more for housing may have been a moral answer in the 1930s. It may have, and I think we could make arguments around this, it may have been the right thing to do at the end of World War II. I think that is arguable, but I think we can make that case. What is not arguable is that this is the answer today. This is no longer the answer. And let me paint a picture for you of the financial conversation. Right now, the financial conversation around housing has started to morph around the idea of a 40-year mortgage, potentially a 50-year mortgage. Again, the idea of housing is really expensive. It's hard to get into. What if we took the payments that people are making, spread them out over a longer period of time? That would allow people to, in a sense, pay more for the same housing. That would make housing more attainable. Let's take 10 years or 20 years more of your life and dedicate that to making payments in order to make housing prices more affordable. I'm going to say something right now, and we're post-election, so I think people can be more generous in recognizing that what I'm going to say is not a partisan thing. It is an observation. If you look at the two major presidential candidates and their parties in regards to housing, we have a kind of a divergence of philosophy in spirit, but really underneath, we don't. We have this same kind of underlying, how do we get housing prices to stay high and get people into it? One approach is let's have down payment assistance. Let's help people pay more for housing by actually giving them money and assistance. You have another approach, which is let's let people pay more by spreading those payments out over a longer period of time. Both of them are very, very sensitive to the financial side of the conversation. Prices cannot be allowed to drop. This is a fundamental problem, a fundamental dissonance for those people who recognize that housing is not affordable and that to make it affordable, housing prices need to come down dramatically. I want to talk about how we make housing prices come down dramatically in the face of all this. I showed this earlier. These are financial products. And again, I'm going to acknowledge these are also places where people live. It's great when we build more housing. This is really important. But let's be clear about what is going on in our marketplace today. These are being built in the way they are being built in the places they are being built because they are great financial products, not because this is where the bulk of the demand is in our market. If we look at the supply of capital, and don't read too deeply into this chart, this is just like a bell curve meant to illustrate where capital is in our economy. Almost all of the capital for housing is in these two products. If you build single family homes, particularly if you are a large home builder building them at a scale, you can get as much money as you need to build houses. Like you, in a sense, have unlimited financing capacity. You can go and borrow as much money as you want. This market is super liquid. You could build this stuff all day long. The same thing goes with the 5/1, the apartment product. If you are one of the handful of home builders who are building these things nationwide, there's only a couple dozen that do like 80% of these. If you are building these, again, lots and lots of capital. Like you can get money all day long to go build this stuff. There's tons of money. If we look at the distribution of capital, if we go to the very wealthy end of the spectrum, what we all recognize is that wealthy people don't have a problem getting money to build housing, right? They can borrow money in many different ways. They can get money to build housing. Where there is no capital in our market is on the very entry level end of the spectrum. The very entry level product has no real easy mechanism for financing. There is no easy way to finance it, and therefore very, very little of it is getting built, even though this is where there is tremendous kind of outsized demand for housing. This stuff has no secondary market, has no natural flow of liquidity, and therefore is starved of capital. We can actually do something about that. What do those units look like at that entry-level position? I'm going to show you 3 examples. This is a single-family home. I want you to think of a person living in a house like this, maybe a person living alone, maybe a person who had a spouse, but they passed away or what have you. This is someone who might have had 3 or 4 bedrooms occupied at one point and now has 1 bedroom occupied. 2 out of 3 of the families that we have, the households that we have in the US, more than 2 out of 3 are 1-person and 2-person households. So individuals or couples living alone. Over 2 out of 3 of the homes we have in this country are single family homes, so homes with multiple bedrooms. If we recognize this situation, we also recognize that a lot of people on fixed incomes living in a house have a lot of expenses that go into maintaining a home. The roof needs to be fixed. Something goes wrong with the heating unit or the air conditioner. You need to do just basic maintenance like shovel sidewalks, mow yards, all this kind of stuff. A lot of people on fixed incomes find this to be really, really difficult. There are a lot of people who are, in a sense, house rich and cash poor. Why don't we allow people like this to, say, take one of their extra bedrooms, put in a kitchenette and an exterior door, and rent it out as an apartment? This is something that humans 100 years ago would have done as a matter of course, like very easy, very simple. Today, this would be called a duplex. It would mess up, all of your permitting. It would be illegal in most places. And again, no capital to do this, right? This is not one of those products that is easily financeable. This is a backyard cottage. Now, stop calling these ADUs. ADUs sounds like a disease that people catch. A backyard cottage is something that people can get their minds around. There are a lot of people, again, in this country who are yard rich and cash poor. The idea that they could turn a little bit of that yard into cash that would allow them to do things is really, really helpful. Oftentimes, we think of these as a place for a mother-in-law to go, and if that's what we need to do to make this work, the idea that we're going to have someone who maybe needs a little help and assistance move in and live in the backyard, but be able to keep their dignity and have a separate unit. This is something that, people can get their minds around and support. It gets a little bit sketchier when, it's no longer the mother-in-law, but it's like the guy who just got divorced and is looking for a place to stay while they get their, feet back under them and their life figured out. But those people need housing too. We could build these things really, really easily, really, really quickly. They're not allowed in most jurisdictions around the country. And where they are allowed, the financing on them is overly difficult. This is a starter house. Stop calling these things tiny houses. In my city, if you want to build a 400, 500, 600 square foot house, we call that a tiny house. You have to go and meet the requirements of a house. You've got to meet subpart A through M of the tiny house ordinance. You've got to go ask permission from your neighbors. You've got to go genuflect in front of the planning board. This is all nonsense because what this is a starter unit, right? It is the base unit that every civilization has always offered people when they're getting started. We can go through my neighborhood right here outside my door and see lots and lots and lots of starter homes. Now, they aren't starter homes anymore, right? Because what happens when you build a starter home? What happens when you build a 400, 500, 600 square foot house? You're getting into something you can afford, something that is scaled to what your pocketbook is. You're allowed to save a little bit of money. When you save some money, what do? They put an addition on the back. They have a kid, on goes the second story. The neighbor comes over and helps. You go help your neighbor. This is something that is very, very natural, very, very human. Try to get one of these financed with a 30-year mortgage. Try to get one of these financed on a secondary market. You can't do it. These things are difficult to get permitted, and they are almost impossible to finance, even though there's an overwhelming demand for this kind of product. Not a fetish. Stop calling them tiny houses. These are starter homes. They're designed to expand. They're designed to grow. They're designed to get people into a unit and allow them the dignity of getting started. So at Strong Towns, we are advocating for 3 things to get us out of this housing trap. These come from the book. I also want to preview that next year, we are going to release a toolkit around all these. I've been out on the road now, and it's interesting to me because we wrote this book, we put this stuff together, we've been sharing this stuff for a while, but there is a need to create, in a sense, like a to-do guide for people. So we're going to have 3 different guides come out next year at strongtowns.org around each of these things. The first one is we need regulatory reform so that we can permit and create these entry-level units very, very quickly. Second, we need an ecosystem of incremental developers. We actually need people who are out there ready to build this stuff. And then third, we need to localize the finance of this. We actually need to create the liquidity in our market locally so that people who want to build these kind of units can get easy access to capital, the same ease of access to capital that we have for other kind of macro preferred products in our system. So let me go through each of these quickly, and then, yeah, we're doing good on time. I will get to Q&A. Let's talk about regulatory reform first. At Strong Towns, we have a saying, no neighborhood can be exempt from change, but no neighborhood should experience radical change. This is the grand bargain that we put forth, and it is in contrast to the grand bargain that I often hear coming from the YIMBY advocates, the Yes in My Backyard. We are very YIMBY at our core at Strong Towns. We need every neighborhood to grow and evolve and change and add housing at a really rapid pace. But the grand bargain that we are putting forth is the idea that this needs to be something that every neighborhood should be allowed to do. The grand bargain that we have now, the grand bargain that we have kind of solidified around, is a very dysfunctional one. It's one that says, all right, every neighborhood can be artificially preserved under glass, right? No neighborhood needs to change. When we build your neighborhood, it can stay exactly how it is. We don't want to fight with any of you about change, except we're going to pick 1 or 2 neighborhoods that are going to radically transform. This is a picture that my colleague and co-author Daniel Harrigus took in Sarasota. This was the unlucky neighborhood that was now getting the radical transformation. And the problem with this grand bargain is that it creates 2 unhealthy scenarios. First, throughout the community, it creates a strong negative reaction against growth. What you want in the grand bargain is not to be the neighborhood that becomes prey to the financial predator. And so, in a sense, we create strong NIMBY reactions throughout everywhere because growth in our community is radical and transformative. Our neighborhood, if we are the unlucky one that gets chosen for growth, we are going to find ourselves living in a completely transformed place, one that is not a better version of where we're at, but one that is a lesser version, one that we don't identify with. As a human reaction, it's very normal to not want to be that. The second negative thing that it does is it actually takes the neighborhood that is being radically transformed and makes it like a haven for land speculators and slumlords. Nobody in this neighborhood is improving their home. Nobody in this neighborhood is putting money into their place. This neighborhood isn't getting better. This neighborhood is just a holding zone for the next 5/1 investment, the next big transformation. This not only distorts the prices, but it actually stifles the amount of development that we see. It stifles the amount of growth that we see. What we need is we need a development strategy where every neighborhood is allowed to add units all the time and is continually have an incentive to do that, to thicken up, where single family homes can become duplexes and triplexes with ease, where we can build starter homes and backyard cottages with ease, where we can add lots and lots of units rapidly. This is a yes to growth, but yes to growth everywhere. In order to do this, the standard that we have set forth for cities is we need to make that next increment very, very simple. You should be able to come in and get a permit if you have a completed application and you show up by 9 p.m. or I'm sorry, 9 a.m. and you want to take that 4th bedroom and turn it into an apartment, or you want to build a backyard cottage, or you want to build a starter home as infill between 2 other homes. If you show up at 9 a.m. with a completed building application, you should be able to walk out by noon with a permit and start building. That is the ease at which we need this to be able to happen in order for these things to happen easily. Go ahead and keep your permitting process for Costco and the big subdivision and the huge apartment. Like, I don't care. You can deal with that. What we want is we need this to happen very fluidly and very easily. And then just as a related thing, get rid of your parking mandates. It is like the #1 thing. It is so easy to do. It's so simple to do, but it is like a signal to everyone. If I look at your zoning code and you still have parking mandates, it tells me that you're not serious about housing. And let me just say this as an overarching thing. If you are a community that is more sensitive to the pain that people have finding a place to park, then you are sensitive to the pain people have finding a place to live. It's a place that I don't want to move to. It's a place that I don't want to invest in. It's a community that I don't want to be part of. And there's a lot of other people who think that way, particularly people with capital who are ready to build housing. All right, the second thing we need to do is create an ecosystem of incremental developers. There's a lot of people we call developers out there who are building housing, but they are tied into this overall macro system. They are delivering, in a sense, a product to the financial market, and they are, in a sense, the broker delivering the mortgage to the bundler so that we can create the product that we have. The broker is building a house in order to facilitate that transaction. What we need is people who work in a very different market. The person who sees the house in disrepair up the street and wants to fix it up and make it into a duplex. The person who knows someone who would like to make that accessory apartment happen and can go in and do it. The person who goes around building these incremental backyard cottages and infill places. Here's the thing about incremental developers. They're everywhere. When I ask people, who in this room has a project that they would like to see done, that they've thought about doing, that they've looked at doing, but just have a little bit of hesitation. Can I do this? I'm not sure. I get hands all over the place. Lots and lots and lots of people see themselves as having this capacity. But often when it is an incremental development situation, what we see is that people are missing 1 or 2 little skills in the handful of skills that we ask incremental developers have. An incremental developer has to be kind of like a Renaissance person, right? They have to know a little bit about everything. They've got to be able to talk to banks and put together pro formas and get financing. They've got to be able to talk to builders and contractors and plumbers and electricians. They've got to be able to negotiate with subcontractors. They've got to be able to sell homes and work with salespeople. They've got to know a little bit about everything. Most people come to the table with some of those skills, but not all of them. The thing that we find most valuable, the thing that kickstarts and helps you create this ecosystem of incremental developers is just to get people together. Get people together who are interested in doing this stuff and they help each other, right? Hey, you had trouble getting that finance? Here's the business card of my banker. He really understands this. Oh, you had trouble with that plumber? Yeah, I wouldn't use that plumber either. Here's a good plumber over here. These are the kind of things that people are happy to help each other with. And understand, incremental developers in a community, yes, they're competing with each other, kind of, but what they're really competing with is the big developers. You're creating a different ecosystem of people who are delivering the kind of units that you need the most. And all you got to do really is get them together. There are groups like the Incremental Development Alliance that are willing to train incremental developers. But the number one step that we can do, and we can do this at incredibly low cost, is just get these people together and have them help each other. Finally, we need to talk about how we get capital in the system in the places that we need it. And this is the part that is actually like the easiest in so many ways, but I think a lot of people look at it as very radical. I want to point out the only thing that makes this radical is that it's not what we do today. If you went back to the 1930s and you talked about having, a market for housing that was going to involve Fannie, Freddie, Ginnie Mae, a whole secondary market, bundlers, securitization, all this stuff, people would have said that's insane. Like it's not what we do. That's not how housing is financed. I want us to, in a sense, step out of the current paradigm and look at where the need is for this capital to flow to these lower priced units that are not being built but are in high demand. And I want you to recognize that we have the capacity to do this and do it at no cost and at very low risk. And let me, before I go on, let me make this other statement about the cost. I'm going to talk a lot now about the role of local government and philanthropy to make this kind of stuff happen. Today in our system, and again, this is a very centralized, very top-down system in terms of how we finance housing. Today in our system, local governments are generally asked to be the dumb money at the card table, right? You go to the card table, there's one dumb money that is designed to lose, that's the mark, that's the person who's going to lose money. We ask local governments to be that player, to lose money in every housing transaction. When we talk housing at the local level, we generally are saying, how much money can a local government lose in order to provide housing? How dumb of an investment can local governments make in order to create more housing? This is not a way to build lots and lots of units very quickly. And let's say we need lots and lots of units built very quickly. We can't do it with local governments losing money. So everything I'm going to show you now is designed where local governments break even or make a tiny bit of money that will allow them to do these things over and over and over again at scale. That is the only way that we make this viable. We actually have to have the discipline to do it that way. Otherwise, we are just going to make a tiny, tiny dent in this problem. And let me give that a specific voice. I was just talking to someone in the hallway before we started this about a new housing thing going in the downtown of my city, but 4 blocks over that way. We're building a new 5/1. And it's got 80 units in it. Great. 12 of those units will be affordable, right? There's over $220,000 subsidy per unit. We are at the local government, we're getting a federal and a state housing grant. We are putting in 20 years of tax increment subsidy. We have waived all the sewer and water hookup fees. So we're essentially giving them free utilities that everybody else is paying for. We've waived all their permit fees, all that other stuff, and we're giving them a subsidized loan. All this stuff in order to get 12 affordable units and 80 units total. This sounds great. Like, Chuck, oh yeah, we need units. Let's go out and build them. Okay. We move heaven and earth. We do all this stuff financially. We've been working on this project for years to bring it to market. There's a study down at City Hall that says, how many units do we need? Today, we need 3,300 affordable units. If this is what it takes to get 12 affordable units, this never will scale, never even come close to scaling. And so if you take this problem seriously, if you say, yes, we need a solution that scales, we need a way to build these units very, very quickly, we need to get them online, we need to have them out there in the marketplace. What I'm going to share with you now is how we do that. So Oswego, New York. There's a group in Oswego, brilliant, brilliant people who have taken philanthropic money and used it to get investment off the sidelines in their neighborhoods. What they recognize is that people in declining neighborhoods in their city were pulling back. They were failing to invest in their own properties because they looked around and they saw other people doing similar, and they thought, this neighborhood doesn't really have a future. I like it here. I would like to stay here. I would like this neighborhood to be nice, but it's going in the wrong direction. And so I feel like I can't put money into my property, invest in my property, fix it up, make it nicer, add on more units, do more stuff, because this neighborhood's kind of going in the wrong, I've got all the signals that it's going in the wrong direction. This is the case in thousands of neighborhoods around the country. What they did in Oswego is they started a very small grant program. It was funded by a philanthropic organization. And what they did is they went around and they said, we will grant you a 50% reimbursement up to certain caps for things that you do to make your property better. There were two catches. Catch number one, whatever you did had to be visible from the street. They wanted it to create a signal for everybody else in the neighborhood that people actually care. The second thing was that you could not apply as an individual. You had to apply as a block. So this had the effect of getting people out and talking to their neighbors. You had to have 70% of the block apply all at the same time. So you're out, I want this grant. I would like to do this thing. I'd like to repaint my house. Can I get some money to do that? I'd like to add on, I'd like to fix up my porch. I'd like to fix the windows, whatever it was. I got to go now talk to all my neighbors about their hopes and dreams for their place. And then once you got a neighborhood going, once you got a block going in the right direction, what would happen is that all of a sudden, bam, overnight, a whole block would get nicer. It wasn't a house here and a house there and a house here. It was bam, overnight, it just got nicer. This started to happen over and over and over again. And pretty soon, people got the message, people got the signal that, hey, this neighborhood's going in the right direction. And even without the grant, they started to take their own money, their own time, their own energy, their own evenings and weekends, and started to invest in their own neighborhood. This neighborhood has invested tiny amounts of money and gotten millions and millions of dollars of property value appreciation and more units added in this neighborhood. And they've done it without dislocation. They've done it, in a sense, to the benefit of the people who live in the neighborhood today. In Muskegon, Michigan, we've seen innovative ways to use tax increment financing to build starter homes. We can use this for backyard cottages. We can use this for the fourth bedroom accessory apartment. The idea here is that with tax increment financing, you have a empty property. In this case, in Muskegon, it was properties that had been sitting, in a sense, with city utilities for decades and had not yet been developed for whatever reason. If you want to build a starter home, so we're not subsidizing homes out on the edge of town, big apartment buildings. We're not subsidizing 2,000, 3,000 square foot homes. These are, up to, I think they set the limit at 1,000 square feet, but these are smaller, meant to be starter homes. If you build that, the taxes on the empty land today are this. Once you're done, the taxes will be this much. We will take that difference in taxes, the increment, and we will apply that as a city to a loan. So the city mechanism is the city goes out and borrows the money. The city then uses that money to make your down payment. And the city pays back the loan with this tax revenue that's coming in over 10, 12, 15 years. This is a way to make housing a lot more affordable, to get people into housing very quickly, and for the city to do this in a way that is easily financeable for them and not going to lose any money. Let me make a point about TIF too. Cities do this stuff all the time. This is very easy. They have this mechanism. They know how to do this. This is ridiculously easy for them to do. They generally do it on bad projects that lose money. This is a way, especially if it's it has to be targeted to this type of unit in this type of neighborhood. If you do that, this is a really, really good use of tax increment financing. We've seen in places like California where backyard cottages have become so ubiquitous that we actually see financing grow up around this. You can almost do a backyard cottage now today as like an impulse buy. You show up to the lot and you pick out your unit and you sign the paper. And in 60 days, they'll have it out there with the financing, just like you were buying a used car. In Minnesota, and I know there are other states. I was in Michigan a couple of weeks ago, and you can do that there. We are able to use special assessments. So we think of special assessments as being when they go out and put in a new street or fix up the sidewalks or put in a new pipe, and the city will charge you an assessment for your share of that cost. This is a mechanism for the city to borrow money and then to recoup that money from the property owner through the assessment process. It will go on your taxes and you'll pay that twice a year with your property taxes. In Minnesota, we can do this for housing. So if you want to build that backyard cottage, if you want to put an accessory apartment, we can do that through the special assessment process. Let me point out something about special assessments and tax increment financing. In a normal situation, you have a primary mortgage, and if you get a secondary mortgage, if there's some kind of default on the house, that people don't pay their loan for whatever reason, the primary mortgage is paid off before the secondary mortgage. So the primary mortgage holder has to be made whole before anyone on the secondary mortgage will get any money. When a city does tax increment financing, when a city does a special assessment, the city jumps in front of the primary mortgage holder. So the city becomes the most secure investor in this property. Again, very, very low risk, very low risk of default. And the city can set the terms of the finances so that, again, they don't lose money. And by not losing money, they can do this indefinitely. As long as there is demand for this product, the city can unlimited finance it. We have seen in Florida where philanthropic organizations and municipalities have co-signed loans. So a lot of people, when they are in this situation, particularly people who at some point in their life had a mortgage burning party, I paid off our house, all that, are loath to go take on home equity loans, just from a cultural standpoint. They also look at the interest rate as being very high. We can use this ability of the city to get the interest rate way down and to not have people have to do this and secure it with their home equity. Cities, philanthropic organizations can, just like your rich uncle could have done when you were a teenager and going and buying your first car or whatever and co-sign the loan with you, a city can go in and say, hey, let's structure this product so it works for you, the local bank, and let's structure it so it works for the property owner. We will co-sign on that product to get this going. Local banks don't like to do these things without that co-sign because, again, it's hard to get rid of that. There's no secondary market for this product. And so you're asking them to hold this on their books. Cities are in a great position, and so are philanthropic organizations, to, in a sense, lubricate this market. Again, we're going to have a toolkit coming out at some point here in the near future that's going to go over these in greater detail. Let me close the financial part here by saying local governments and philanthropic organizations can help finance these low-cost, high-quality housing options. We can do this at scale. We can do it over and over again, and we can do it at no cost to taxpayers. These are tools that we routinely use for other things. We routinely use them in ways that lose money for the community. We can actually do it around these entry-level units, not the big apartments, not the single-family homes out on the edge of town, the infill starter homes, the accessory buildings, the backyard cottages. We can do this as local governments at no cost to taxpayers at as much scale as we need to do. If we go out and build units in this way, if we fix our regulatory reform, if we get fix our local regulations and make it easy to build these things, if we get incremental developers out there who are building this stuff, supporting each other, figuring this out, if we finance and flood this market with enough capital that it needs, what we will see is that we're not going to crash prices on single-family homes. We're not going to crash prices on apartment buildings. We will still get those. There'll still be people that finance them. There'll still be people that participate in that marketplace. And that's great. That marketplace can happen and it's no problem. But what we will be doing is we will be creating another market in our city, a more competitive market that allows people the dignity to get into a place that they can afford, to save up some money, and then to enter whatever other market transaction they want to from a position of strength. This is going to calm our markets, making them operate less like a financial instrument and more like the supply and demand that we need. We can actually get people into houses rapidly, get people into houses in a way they can afford, and do this without any cost to taxpayers. This is how we escape the housing trap, and it's urgent that we start this path. If you want to know more, the book obviously is available now everywhere books are sold. We work with Wiley Publishing, and they promise us they can get it into every local bookstore. You can go to housingtrap.org and find out where to get it. Strongtowns.org is our website. We talk about this stuff all the time. We are publishing articles every weekday. We've got lots of video, lots of podcasts on housing and other topics related to city building. And we welcome you to join our conversation. I said at the very beginning that this is our member week. So if you go to our website today, you're going to get inundated with asks to become a member. Go ahead and do that if you want. But if you're just finding us now today, spend some time, feel things out, do some searching around, and you'll find that we have a lot to help you with if your goal is to make your place stronger and more prosperous. Thanks, Harvey.
Well, thank you, Chuck. That was really a really lucid, clear description of the problem and some possible paths forward. And we have a ton of questions, so I'm going to turn it over to
Cool.
David pretty quickly. But I want to ask one question before I turn it over to Dave.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, we're doing some work like in my center, CURA, about past development processes, things like urban highways and the type of disconnectedness that we have developed, as you talk about in your book. I'm wondering, how do you balance organic small development with the desire to intentionally and planfully, for lack of a better word, heal and reconnect neighborhoods and cities? Like, how do we undo some of this legacy that we've
Yeah.
invested in?
It's a really good question. It's a hard question. It's a sensitive question. Um, Let me preview. Yeah, I think I can do this today. Let me preview part of what I pitched to the publisher for the next book. I've got a 5-book agreement with Wiley. The next book is going to be on economic development. And the thing that I've been spending my time on recently, and the thing that's kind of noodling around in my brain, um, starts with Black Wall Street in Tulsa. We get the story of Black Wall Street, and you run into it every now and then. And the story is there was this place that was really successful. It was former slaves had built this place. It was really successful, and then the white people in Tulsa got mad. There was tension. They came in. It was brutal. It was horrible. It was racist. It was terrible. And that's the story. And then the story is like, how do we heal this? How do we fix it? Or what do we do now? And to me, the fascinating thing about the story, and it gets more fascinating the more I dig into it, is not that part of it. The fascinating part of it is how did human beings, how did our fellow Americans who were freed slaves with no capital, no formal education, so to speak, um, build something so robust, so amazing? How do they essentially out of nothing create this thing that was so prosperous? How did that happen? And the reality is that it happened very organically, very internally. It happened, incrementally over time. I'm going to use a term that Jane Jacobs used, which is co-creation. I think a lot of times in our desire to do good, in our affluence, in our kind of technical professional way, we ask a question like, how do we come in and fix this? How do we come in and heal this? How do we come in and solve this problem? And I really think that our approach needs to evolve to say, how do we go in and co-create with people a better place? And part of that is agreeing to a certain level of messiness and a certain level of, I think as planners, we would say just like dysfunction, like start and stop. Like we try this, it doesn't work. We try that, it doesn't work. But part of it is allowing people to pursue their own visions and their own dreams and being, in a sense, supportive of that in an incremental way. I don't have a grand plan for how we heal places that we've wrecked in this way. But I feel like the more time we spend there and the more time we spend being of service to the next challenge and the next challenge and the next challenge of people there, I feel like we could start to stitch places back together. And it might not look the way that it looked before. Like this might not be a restoration, but it might be a reparation where we actually make it ultimately better with the people who are there. That's how I would try to answer that question.
Okay, thank you for that. As I said, ton of questions. So Dave, take it away.
All right. First, Chuck, thank you so much for that presentation. That was just
Thank
wonderful.
you. Great.
And we have a very engaged audience today. You touched on a lot, and they have questions about a lot. So to everyone who contributed a question, thank you. We won't be able to get to all 55.
Dave, you know what? If we don't get to, I'll do what I did last time. Last time we had so many cool questions, and I think I downloaded them all and I answered them all on a podcast. So we'll do that again. If we don't get to your question, I'll do that on the podcast. I promise.
That is very generous of you. Thank you for offering that. So I'm going to do my best to keep us moving here, and we'll start with Kirk Crabtree. He was first up. What are your thoughts on the statement, "We do not have a housing quantity shortage. There are enough units. The true problem is affordability and income disparity"?
Well, first of all, in a big picture sense, that's absurd. We do have a housing shortage problem. I do think there's some nuance though to that. I think that it is debatable. I'm not sure what side I fall on in this debate, but I think it is debatable whether we have a single family shortage. I think it's debatable whether we have a luxury unit shortage or just a unit shortage. I think it is not debatable in any way that we have a massive shortage of entry level units. And so, I think people on the margins have this debate and they're generally speaking like different languages. We need way more. Well, yeah, let me draw a line here. I don't buy into a bunch of kind of standard held beliefs that a lot of people in this space have. And the one that I'd say I don't really buy into the most is the idea that the more luxury housing we build, the more things will filter down and become affordable to people at the entry level. I think that is true in theory. I don't think it's true in practice. And I think the reason why we're seeing it not be true in practice is because there just isn't the saturation of entry level units that would actually make that real. And so I'm sympathetic to the argument that people make, but yeah, we need to build a lot more. A big part of the problem is supply.
Very good, thank you. Next, we'll go to Lonnie Gray's question. In Portland, has a hotter, more expensive market than some other places. I've started an incremental development working group. I'm researching financial models, shared equity, CLTs, and housing co-op ideas to help groups come together to live well. Do you have other resources you would recommend they leverage? I know you mentioned your toolkit.
Well, I get this question a lot. Like, okay, wow, Chuck, like this is a really different way of thinking about financing housing. It's kind of scary. And I'm like, I don't know why it's scary, because you do this all the time. You just do it for dumb projects instead of projects you need. You do it for projects you literally lose money on instead of projects where you can actually like break even and help people. The models that you mentioned in that question, I want to draw a distinction here, and I think it's an important one. A lot of our reaction to a dysfunctional housing market and really a dysfunctional development pattern in general is to what I'm going to say, like hunker down into financial models that embrace stasis. So I don't like the way this system works. And so we're going to create a co-op or a trust or something where we can essentially be shielded from the craziness of this system. I get that as a response, and I would never criticize people who take that route. I would not recommend that cities widely embrace that, and I would not recommend that we widely promote that, because what that is it is an imposed stasis on systems that need to be more dynamic. The whole idea of a co-op is that we're going to opt out of the dynamics of this broader market, and we're going to do that collectively as a group. What we really need is we need more dynamism in the system. We need neighborhoods of single family homes to evolve over the next decade into neighborhoods of duplexes and triplexes. And we need that happen rapidly and organically in the places where there's high demand. And we need to do it in a way that benefits the existing homeowners and the new people who are moving in. When we make things into trusts and co-ops and kind of opt-out kind of things, we solve a problem in the short term for a handful of people in a way that I think accentuates the problem more broadly. So again, no criticism, but I do think that the answer here needs to lie in local governments utilizing and leveraging their ability to tap into what is an essentially unlimited amounts of capital to finance projects where they are very secure and will get their money back, where people want to build housing locally.
Very good. Let's say we have a mid-sized city and they have $10 million. How would you advise them to best use those dollars to address the supply shortage?
They have $10 million.
Sounds like a specific question. Someone may have $10 million.
I mean, okay. I don't necessarily want cities to become banks. I think cities as banks is a really bad deal. And I also think cities like hoarding cash is a really bad deal. Cities need to like functionally do the things that they're supposed to do. They need to fix the roads. They need to maintain the pipes. They need to pick up the garbage. They need to keep the electric running. They need to create this platform so that humans can flourish. That's what a city is. City government's role is to like competently do that. I think when cities start to get cute around the margins of, we'll give this incentive here and this incentive here, and we'll lose money on this house here and this, I think that we lose the narrative. The narrative is really about humans doing this for themselves and the city being the supportive structure and framework that facilitates those kind of things. And so if you're telling me we have a $10 million war chest for housing, I would say, I would do a little bit of the Oswego thing. Like I would give some neighborhood grants, but the thing that is brilliant about that program is these are really, really tiny, tiny grants. I would do a lot of maintenance in my core neighborhoods and make sure that the city was taking care of their side of the business. And then I would facilitate loans on these projects, but I would want to do it in the most secure way possible. The reason why TIF and the reason why special assessments are good and like a direct loan from the city is not. A direct loan is like an unsecured loan. It's like me giving you a loan. If I do a special assessment, it's like literally on your taxes. And like you have to pay that off before you get to any other thing on the thing. You'd become like the lien holder on the property. So yeah, I'm not enticed by a big war chest as much as I am by the tools that cities have to do good stuff.
Thank you for that. We have a number of questions getting at what I perceive to be how can we nudge, what needs to change to incentivize both public and private sector to move in this direction. So can you expand a little bit on that in terms of, you talked a little bit about the role of cities there. So on private sector, one questioner asks, is the private market equipped to fix the crisis? Is this something that can happen? So could you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Well, I think that we have to expand our minds in terms of what the private market would be. I mean, I think if you're looking at the current set of developers and the current set of banks, no, I think they actually, in many ways, perpetuate the crisis. I mean, I think it is a feature, not a flaw of the system, that housing prices are high and remain high. And I mean, you see right now, there's a lot of discussion about, well, in Austin, Texas, prices have dropped right now because they built so much. And I'm like, okay, let's pretend that that's theoretically true. Maybe it's true. What you see now is that banks and builders are starting to pull back from building more. Not because prices have actually fallen to be affordable, but because the prices have stopped going up. And so part of the housing trap is being stuck in this loop where there's no collusion going on. You don't have builders sitting down with bankers going, here's how we juice prices. You have this feedback loop that is a macro financial feedback loop, not a local supply and demand feedback loop. And so when we say private market versus public, I feel like what we really need to be talking about is a top-down market versus a bottom-up market. Right now, we have a very top-down market. What we need competitively is a bottom-up analog to that market. And the bottom-up stuff is more chaotic. It's more diffuse. It is, more prone to oversupply and undersupply, and but it is the one that can also act the quickest and the most dynamic, and is the least sensitive to kind of the macroeconomic trends. And so I wouldn't think of it in terms of private market. I would think of it in terms of how do we get more bottom-up action, because what we're stuck with today now is just top-down.
Okay, let's talk about parking. So we have folks concerned about parking on multiple fronts. We have difficulties getting parking minimums changed. We have developers who are trying to build with less parking, getting pushed back. We have communities apparently out there now with maximums getting pushed back from developers who say they need more parking to move those units. This is something that comes up all the time. So parking and housing, specifically to the incremental development, what can we do here?
Well, this is always an interesting question, because it comes down to a cultural conversation, right? And again, I will kind of repeat, but maybe emphasize what I said earlier. I feel like in places where the cultural conversation is, we are really, really hypersensitive to finding a convenient place to park. And we are rather insensitive to finding an affordable place to live. I don't have any like tools for changing that cultural sensitivity. I mean, obviously, I think dialogue is part of it. Obviously, I feel like, taking this incrementally and working on it is part of it. I think cities benefit from making this stuff by right, so they don't have to debate it every time it comes up. Start with those backyard cottage. I mean, in a very practical sense, if you have a house with 4 bedrooms and you used to have parents with 3 teenage kids, you had cars all over the place. And everybody was cool with it, everybody was fine with it, and everybody made it work. If you go and take one of those bedrooms and now all the kids are gone, and you take one of those bedrooms and make it an apartment that you rent out, yes, you will have a car. You're not going to have more cars than if you had teenage kids. At the least, it will be the same number of cars. Why we would ask that person to provide parking as part of that transition is just absurd. It doesn't make sense from a practical standpoint. The only reason we wouldn't is because we have a heightened cultural sensitivity to finding enough places to park. And if you're asking me like how to have that conversation, at Strong Towns, we are having this conversation about parking all the time, and we're trying to make people like more aware of it. My silly neighbor lives 2 blocks from the park. We met in the park this summer. They drove 2 blocks. Like, I can't even fathom what it takes to do that. So a lot of this is just waking people up to their own sensitivities, right? Like, here's what I'm sensitive to, here's what I'm not sensitive to. That's a human conversation around parking. I can't make it. If your city is like, we are going to max out the amount of parking we have and we don't care what the cost is on housing, I don't have like a magic incantation that will get beyond that. I really don't. You got to want to change to a degree. And I do think that Strong Towns as a movement, we want everybody to start down this path, but I'm also looking like I would like everybody to have a good diet and exercise, but sometimes you have to have a heart attack before you do that. I think there's ways to talk to people when they're at pivotal moments that will help them like move to that next step. But just to walk into a McDonald's and be like, all of you heathens need to start eating salad, it's like the wrong venue for that conversation, right? It doesn't work. And if you walk into a council meeting where they're debating a new apartment building, and there's a bunch of people there who are freaked out about parking, and you say, hey, we shouldn't have these parking minimums, you're not going to be very successful.
That's a great analogy. And I want to get 2 more in here that I think come up a lot. And Harvey, I want to give you a chance to have your pick of questions as you've had a chance to review. So first, let's talk about something that can be a conversation stopper. Say, how can you be an incremental developer to build backyard cottages or starter homes or 4-unit townhomes when building costs and prices do not allow for affordable sale prices? So we hear this a lot. This is rock bottom. You cannot build for less than this. What's your response to that?
I get this too, and I'm stuck between 2 impulses, right? The one impulse is a recognition that prices are downstream of a whole bunch of other things, and I use on this last part of the book tour, I gave a presentation to a bunch of housing economists. That was one of the most bizarre experiences of my life, because they actually said, housing, if we just put more money into the market, if we get more liquidity in the housing market, we will get efficiencies like you get with, and they literally said this, like you get with cell phones and big screen TVs, and the price will come down. And I'm like, how well has that worked in the medical profession? How well has that worked, which is like 18% of our GDP. How well has that worked in secondary education, where we just pumped a lot more money into universities and it, of course, brought the price down, right? No, it didn't. What it did in both of these is that it made the, in a sense, supply chain or the delivery mechanisms very non-responsive and ultimately resulted in higher prices. This is, in a macro sense, the thing I see happening in the supply chain for building houses and for doing this type of work, is that, yes, there's certain of it that is commodity based. I mean, lumber is in many ways commodity based, but you also have just this entire chain of delivery that has feasted on liquidity for a long time and is not very tight. It is not very responsive. It's not very competitive, quite frankly. And so you do see higher costs across the board. Land is a really good example of this. I have developers come into me all the time and say, Chuck, land prices are this high and we've got to pay it. And I'm like, okay, if that doesn't work, if that price doesn't work, how can you pay it? Well, because I pay it and then someone pays it and then someone pays it and it works out. Well, okay, then that price of land does work. Well, no, it's too high. It's all a function of like the end amount of money that we can finance. I think that fixing this market, making it more bottom up, actually solves some of those problems in ways that I don't think are like easily identifiable and describable today. But it does create a different set of market players that are sensitive to price in different ways. And let me give you one concrete example. I have seen a lot of people who do incremental development. They're like, I need someone to come in and lay tile. And then they get the tile bids and they're all insane. And they're like, screw it, I'm just going to go lay the tile myself. And those are the kind of things that actually bring down the price of laying tile. So multiply that over a whole ecosystem of people doing that kind of work. There will be new players, new entrants in the market that come in at different price points that solve some of these problems for us, that are sidelined today because of the flood of liquidity.
Very good, very good. I think that gets back to your point of whether or not something is radical depends on whether you're considering it in our current context or not, right? So a lot of these things we're making baked in assumptions.
Thank you.
And if you change the context and then consider the scenario, it may seem you can see the fit there. We are almost at time. Chuck, thank you so much. Harvey, I know I said I wanted to make sure you have a chance to jump in with a final question here.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of really good questions here. And thank you, Chuck, for offering to record a podcast. And we'll post that at cura.osu.edu once you complete that. So thank you for that very generous offer. I guess I'll ask one quick, but I think it's an important question. How should a regular person begin advocating for these changes in their town? What would you suggest?
So thank you for asking this as the last question, because I'm going to do some self-serving or some organizational work here. Strong Towns is all about doing that. When I was working as a civil engineer, as a land use planner, a lot of what I was trying to do was to fix my fellow planners, fix my fellow engineers. Like, let's get them more information. Then it was like, let's help elected officials. And in all those instances, when we would give them stuff, they would say, oh my gosh, this is really good. This is really important. I remember as an engineer in the early 2000s, like giving city officials, like, I know you didn't ask me for this report, but here's a report that I put together explaining why this project is going to make us broke, like why this project is not good. And they would say, oh, this is really good. This is really compelling. And so we're not going to do the project? Oh no, we're going to do the project. Like, everybody wants it. I started to realize, and really Strong Towns was founded on the idea that this is a broader cultural conversation that needs to shift. Our expectations around what local government is supposed to do, what our development pattern should look like, where the next RBs should be, like all this stuff is built into our culture and the way we think about our cities. That is what needs to change more than anything else. And so what we tell people is, if you're really interested in this, if you want to see change, first of all, everything we write is for a general audience. I'm not writing for technical professionals. We don't put videos out for deep technical people. All of our stuff is designed to be consumed by average people. And this is number two, it's designed to be shared. And so take our videos, take our social media posts, take our articles, and talk to other people about them. The way that we spread this message, the way we change this, is by literally talking to the people in our family, talking to our neighbors, talking to others at the soccer field and at the barber shop and at the coffee shop about this stuff, and giving them stuff that they can access so that they can develop a shared cultural understanding with us about what we want to see. Strong Towns, the movement, is about creating and facilitating that conversation more than anything else. And so please use the resources we provided. They're all free. They're not free to produce. They are paid for by our members. But even if you're not a member, they're free for you to access. They're free for you to use. That's why our members donate to us, is because we want everybody to have this, and we want this conversation to spread. So please, strongtowns.org, make use of all of it. It's all there for you. And it's all Creative Commons license for you to use, reuse, share as much as you can to do good.
That was a good ending question and a good, capstone
Yeah.
to this webinar. So
Yeah.
thank
No,
you,
I'm happy.
Chuck.
Thank
You very
you.
much. Again, we'll be posting this recording and also the Q&A podcast at cura.osu.edu. So thank you, Chuck, and thank you, audience, for being here today. Our final event in the Responding to the Housing Crisis webinar series will be Friday, December 6th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and it'll be the State of Housing in Central Ohio with Carly Booz, Lark Mallory, Jason Reese, and Amy Regal. So tune in at that time for a discussion about what's going on here in Central Ohio and some of the practical solutions that are emerging. Once again, thank you all for being here. And again, thanks again, Chuck, and keep doing good things.
Thanks, friends. Take care, everybody.